What's happening, y'all? Welcome inside the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Bush coming at you solo today to break down everything that you need to know from preseason week 2. As you guys might notice, I have a new camera now. You guys can probably see bits of the BLT that I just ate in my mustache right now. But in today's video, we're going to break down some preseason takeaways that'll help you get a leg up on your sheep league mates that are not paying attention. So I'm going to go game by game, day by day. We had a bunch of games, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We have one more on Monday that I won't be able to break down, but if anything happens, I'll definitely keep you guys posted. But if you enjoy videos like this, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button while you're down there as well. Leave a comment too. We will engage with you down there. But without further ado, let's hit the intro. So if you guys missed our live streams in Buffalo, what we're doing this week is a special giveaway for Underdog Fantasy. By using the promo code FSE at sign up and first deposit on underdogfantasy.com, you'll get 100% back on whatever you put in. So if you put in $20, you'll have $40 on the site to play with, etc. And you'll also be entered for a chance to win $50. We're going to give away 5 $50 credits for underdogfantasy.com for those of you guys that use our promo code from August 20th, which is when we started the contest, to August 27th. So if you haven't already taken the plunge yet, check out underdogfantasy.com, the best place to get your share of great prizes, $10 million in total prizes in Best Ball Mania 3, which is just a $25 entry. And also you can get great practice for your home league drafts that I'm sure many of you guys have coming up this week as well. So now let's get into the preseason games themselves. Bears versus Seahawks was the first game of the week on Thursday. The Seahawks pretty much rested everybody. Kenneth Walker would have been maybe the only guy that we were interested in, but he's dealing with a sports hernia right now, so he was not out there. The Bears showcased some things, though. We did have Khalil Herbert yet again getting all the shares of the snaps with the ones in Montgomery's absence, but then we had Khalil Herbert in Saturday's practice, had a mysterious injury on Saturday where he supposedly was carted off the field. It does sound like he's going to be fine. Doesn't sound like it's anything serious, but definitely something to monitor going forward. And then Velus Jones, the third-round rookie that they took, he saw some work in 3 wide receiver sets as well. So maybe worth something in deep leagues, but for the most part, a pretty uninteresting game on Thursday. Now let's get into Friday's game with Carolina versus the New England Patriots. You guys can see the snap shares for the Patriots on the screen right now. It looks like a big-time rotation at wide receiver for New England. It looks like Kendrick Bourne has fallen out of favor with this coaching staff, and obviously not great for me because he's been a guy that I've been pretty high on as a good deep round sleeper there, but kind of looks like a mess all around. We have Jacoby Myers, we have Devontae Parker, we have Nelson Aguilar, we have Tyquan Thornton, and again, Kendrick Bourne as well, getting some runs with the first team. Looks like all these guys are going to be mixed in. Jacoby Myers is probably the only one that's going to be on the field constantly, I would say, the guy that's going to be out there most consistent. And then we also had the running back position, which is something that everybody is monitoring with Ramondre Stevenson's season. I still love both Damian Harris and Ramondre Stevenson at their prices because Damian Harris has slipped quite a bit since the Ramondre buzz has come out. So I also like him as well. We did see Ty Montgomery prove to be a bit of a nuisance, but the one thing I will say about these snap counts, they're not necessarily the stickiest be-all, end-all because they kind of rotated these guys per drive. So the snap counts that you guys see on the screen, it just so happened that Ty Montgomery's drives were longer than Damian Harris's and Ramondre Stevenson's drives. They rotated them in kind of, Stevenson played the first drive and then Harris played the second drive and et cetera, et cetera. So I wouldn't pay attention to the snaps themselves, but they are probably going to mix in these guys in a rotation of some kind. Now to the Saints at Packers. There wasn't too much to speak of in this game because most guys were resting, but definitely ideal for Chris Olave and for Romeo Doubs. Both of these guys ran the most routes on the team, commanding some targets as well. The Saints didn't have Michael Thomas and Jarvis Landry out there, but it does look like Chris Olave will be the clear number 3 wide receiver from a usage standpoint right away, and Doubs should be in contention as well. But it's tough to outline where Romeo Doubs is going to fit in as far as like how many routes he's going to run during the season because they haven't played Allen Lazard, they haven't played Christian Watson, who's been dealing with injury, and they haven't been playing Sammy Watkins as well in these preseason games. So at the very least, it looks like Doubs is going to be the wide receiver 4 on this team. Maybe he's the wide receiver 3 ahead of like Sammy Watkins or whatever. But for the most part, definitely good news that he's out there at least commanding targets and looking good. To the Rams at Texans, the next game that we have here. The Houston Texans snap counts you guys can see on the screen. There was a couple of things of note here. Number one, we didn't have Brandon Cooks in this game, but it looks like Nico Collins will be the surefire number 2 option in this offense, and he looked pretty good in this game as well. I think most people assumed last year that Nico would be the number 2 in this offense, but he really only had 3 games where he exceeded 75% of the snaps. He had 10 targets, 4 targets, and 8 targets in those 3 games as well, and he got 6 targets in this preseason game. I went back and watched him, looked pretty good. Definitely encouraging to see as a second-year, breakout candidate going late in the draft. And with Brandon Cooks, I mean, he's an older wide receiver. He's dealt with a history of concussions as well, so there is some upside for Nico Collins to develop a rapport with Davis Mills and potentially take a big step if he is a very talented player. The other major note from this game was obviously the preseason darling himself, Dameon Pierce, didn't even play. He got the night off, and that is the best case scenario for running backs, right? All the best running backs in fantasy are not playing in the preseason. According to Aaron Wilson, he played so well in the first game that the Texans actually rested him, which is very, very good news for a 4th-round rookie. Usually when you're a day 3 rookie pick, they love to see you play in preseason games, continue to earn that role, but it looks like Pierce did what he needed to do in that first preseason game to earn the starting role for this backfield. So very, very encouraging news for Dameon Pierce. He is rising head and shoulders in my rankings right now. Now let's get into Saturday's games. I had to go back and rewatch a lot of these because we were in Buffalo for most of these games. And we did have the Bills in action against the Broncos. Twitter was buzzing when Gabe Davis caught a touchdown in this game. But we do have confirmation on one thing. The important thing that we needed to see out of Gabe Davis was that he's running a lot of snaps, ran more snaps actually than Stephon Diggs, and more routes as well. He is absolutely the number 2 wide receiver in this offense, which again was not a guarantee. I think everybody assumed it was going to happen, but it is nice to see confirmation that it is going to happen. And the targets per route run bros are very high on Gabriel Davis. And if they have anything to say about it, it looks like he will have a solid year as well. So I'm getting a little bit higher on Gabriel Davis, a guy that I'm okay taking, in the 5th, 6th round area of fantasy drafts. I'm still not going to take him, in the 4th round where he goes on Underdog Fantasy. But again, we've talked about how he might just be elevated due to stacking reasons and big play upside and all that kind of stuff. But if you're in a home league draft and he's there in the 5th, 6th round, definitely okay pulling the trigger on him there. We also had a lot of news out of the backfield with the Buffalo Bills. They showcased quite a bit in this game. Number one, Devin Singletary looks good. I know everybody hates Devin Singletary, but he was getting all the snaps with the ones this week. Last week, he didn't even play. He was the only running back that was rested. And Singletary as a round 10, round 8, round 9, wherever he ends up going, 0 RB type of target. If you guys go light at running back early on in the draft, he is looking like a great investment there, especially in the beginning of the season, which for those of you guys that have run 0 RBs or hero RBs in the past, you know that the early portion of the season is the hardest part of finding running back production because drafting all these handcuffs and drafting rookie running backs and stuff like that will usually do well for you later in the season. But early on in the season, I think Devin Singletary can be a guy that you can lock in to your RB1 or 2 slot in a 0 or a hero RB type of build. So I really, really like him as a guy going just outside the running back dead zone that you can get there in that round 9 to 10 range, who I think could have a big workload early on in the season. And there was not much on the Broncos side to take away from, except stop drafting Albert Okwuegbunam. He is pretty clearly going to be in a tight end by committee here. Greg Dulcich has not played at all in the preseason, and yet they still won't give Albert O a full workload in that area. And they're also letting him play, even though Javonte Williams, Melvin Gordon, Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, all the starters are not playing, and Albert O is playing. So what it makes me think is that Greg Dulcich and Albert O will both be co-starters at that position, and that's not a situation we really want any part of. So we can move on to the Colts Lions. Not a ton to take away from this game outside of the fact that, again, Alec Pierce is getting the number 2 role in this offense, and it's pretty clear in my opinion. I tweeted this out the other day. Basically, I wanted to know how often late round hits at wide receiver were coming from rookie wide receivers and second year wide receivers. I figured, late round dart throws, rookie wide receivers and second year wide receivers are good investments. And the answer is they are great investments. If you're going to take late round dart throws at second year and rookie wide receivers, that's what you want to be doing, because about half the time, these guys were producing 10+% win rates. And what that basically means is in best ball, you have an 8.3% chance of winning your league, 1 out of a 12-man league. 10% win rate would be an above expectation win rate over the players going around that area. So that's definitely wild. Here at FSE, we load up early on wide receivers. But if you do need to draft guys in the late rounds, if you went running back heavy or whatever, make sure you're taking shots on rookie wide receivers. So guys like Alec Pierce fit the description. Guys like Wan'Dale Robinson and Jahan Dotson and Christian Watson and David Bell. Also second-year guys like Nico Collins and Josh Palmer are great investments late in drafts if you guys need some wide receiver depth or if you're just shooting for some upside late in your draft. So definitely a big note for Alec Pierce that he's going to be on the field and he's going to be running routes and he has opportunities to command targets in that Colts offense. So Commanders versus Chiefs, the doors absolutely blew off Twitter again with Antonio Gibson. Antonio Gibson was the kick returner on the opening kickoff of this game, and Brian Robinson got most of the touches with the one. So this is definitely not good news for Antonio Gibson. He is going to be plummeting down my rankings in the coming days as we make some updates. So for those of you guys that have access to our rankings, those updates will be coming in the next couple days, and they should be, locked and loaded, ready for you guys to do your fantasy drafts. And if you want our rankings, Underdog Fantasy, you get our rankings for free if you sign up using the promo code FSE. And like I said, you'll get 100% back and also a chance at the giveaway, or you can go to patreon.com if you already have an Underdog account, or if you are in a state where you can't play on Underdog, for those of us in like Ontario, for example. So Washington snap counts, you guys can see them on the screen. Again, another clear sign that Jahan Dotson is the number 2 receiver in this wide receiver core. He's the best kept secret in fantasy football right now. Any rookie wide receiver that has played as much with the ones as Jahan Dotson, and as good of a prospect as Jahan Dotson was, simply has to be an auto smash in drafts. Once you get outside of the round 10 range, I would say, is when I'm absolutely okay taking a shot on Jahan Dotson. He's being used as like a Z flanker in this offense, which is also great news because it means he'll be on the outside in 2 wide receiver sets and not playing primarily in the slot, which I think is what Curtis Samuel is going to be doing in this offense. And this receiver core is kind of fun too. Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, and Curtis Samuel. There's a lot of flexibility with those guys. I think this offense could be a lot better than people think. At least this passing game could be a lot better than people think. J.D. McKissic was out for this game, so we got to see Antonio Gibson in the J.D. McKissic role running some routes. He ran 7 out of 10 routes, and he had a nice angle route catch over the middle of the field. But unfortunately, once we get to week 1, J.D. McKissic will be back on the field, and we have no idea what to do with Antonio Gibson because it looks like Brian Robinson is really edging on his territory for the early down guy, and I think it makes sense. Brian Robinson is a running back. He played running back in college. Antonio Gibson did not. He had to learn that at the NFL level, and it's pretty clear to me that Antonio Gibson is better suited for like a wingback type of role. We just really don't know how that's going to play out as far as the regular season is concerned. So Antonio Gibson, big time avoid in draft. Brian Robinson, going to be just absolutely meteoric rise for the rest of the offseason in his ADP. He's probably going to find his way into like the 8th, 9th, 10th round area of most fantasy drafts, and I think that's where he belongs, to be honest. So another guy that I think is going to be rising in my rankings as well. On the Kansas City Chiefs side of things, we probably need to cool our jets a little bit on Sky Moore because he's not getting the usage that we're seeing from Jahan Dotson, for example, or from guys like Chris Olave as far as other rookie wide receivers are concerned. Despite Juju and Hardman not being on the field for these preseason games, he's still running the 3rd most routes of the Chiefs wide receivers behind Justin Watson, who's a Tampa Bay Buccaneers cast-off, and Marquez Valdez-Scantling. So I'm not really worried about him from like a talent perspective because he looks good, but the fact that he's not able to get on the field and run a lot of routes makes him probably not a great investment early in drafts. If you guys love Sky Moore, don't draft him in like the 7th, 8th round because for the most part, he's just not out there enough to be able to pay off at that ADP. Maybe he comes on towards the second half of the season, but by that point, that might be a sunk cost in your draft if you drafted him that early. So I'd probably be avoiding him. Look to trade for him maybe mid-season. Maybe he'll be even on the waiver wire if he's not running enough routes. So Travis Kelce, some people raise some red flags about this, but I'm not really worried about him not playing a ton of snaps. He's a veteran. I don't expect him to be out there on every freaking play. But I wasn't drafting him round 1 anyways, and I'm not getting a ton of Travis Kelce, so it didn't make a ton of difference to me either way. So let's move on to the Buccaneers and Titans game. Not a ton to take away from on the Bucs side. We saw a little bit of Leonard Fournette. Tom Brady is back in the building. That is the biggest takeaway from this team. He rejoined the team. He's going to be the quarterback. No worries there. Not that I was worried, but I think some people might have been. Rashad White also showed some things as well. With Gio Bernard suffering an injury in last week's preseason game, we saw Rashad White get the second team reps as the running back, and he looked pretty good in this game. So another guy that I think is a great, late round dart throw, rookie running back handcuff type that you can add to fill out your running back core late in the draft. And then on the Titans side of things, we're revealing more and more red flags on Treylon Burks. The only thing that I know for sure about Treylon Burks is that the wide receiver core of this Tennessee Titans team, Robert Woods is the number 1, and it looks like Nick Westbrook-Ikine is the number 2 as far as usage is concerned. And then after that, Racey McMath, Dez Fitzpatrick, Cody Hollister, guys that are, shouldn't be even remotely in the same conversation as Treylon Burks, are out-snapping him in preseason games, which is not good. Again, I know I love Burks as the dynasty prospect, but we can't let dynasty cloud our redraft thinking, right? When we're talking about a redraft perspective, a 7th round, 8th round Treylon Burks is too high from where he's currently going and where he needs to be going based on the usage that we're seeing. He needs to be a double-digit round pick because we're seeing all over the league with guys like Jahan Dotson and Alec Pierce and some of these other rookies, they're getting the usage with the first team, and Treylon Burks just simply isn't. And it's going to be it's going to take time probably for him to carve out that role. I don't think they're just going to suddenly flip a switch. Week 1, he's going to be the starting full-time outside wide receiver across from Robert Woods. I just don't think that's going to happen. I think it's going to take him a couple weeks. He's going to be like a 40, 50, 60% snap share guy for the first 5 games or so of the season. And then eventually he can work his way into the starting lineup. So a guy that I'm not drafting in drafts right now. In Dynasty, by all means, keep drafting Treylon Burks, but in redraft leagues, I am avoiding him currently at his price. Dolphins at Raiders. Raiders rested everyone, so no takeaways from there. The Miami Dolphins played all their starters except for Tyreek and Jalen Waddle. It's pretty clear. The biggest takeaway from this game is that it's pretty clear that Mike Gesicki is not a guy that we want to be drafting. He won't be very fantasy relevant. Mike Gesicki had the absolute nuts role for like 4 years in Miami. He was the guy that was in the slot, on the outside, running as a big wide receiver. He was not blocking ever. He was leading the league every single year in percentage of plays in the slot at the tight end position. He had every opportunity to command targets, which he did to some degree. But now we have Tyreek coming in. We have Jalen Waddle in his second year. And Mike Gesicki is running more of like a George Kittle role, which sounds like a good thing, but it is. I'm telling you, it is definitely not. Because George Kittle, if he was running the role that Mike Gesicki runs in Miami, in San Francisco, George Kittle would be the easily number 1 tight end in fantasy football because he runs a role where he is blocking a lot more than we want our fantasy tight ends to be blocking. And Mike Gesicki is inheriting that role with Mike McDaniel coming over from San Francisco. So this is not a guy that I am excited about in fantasy. I will not be drafting this dude anymore on underdog drafts. I will not be drafting him in home league drafts either. The backfield, another thing that we got to try to work out with the Miami Dolphins. It looks like a pretty big headache on paper with Michelle, with Edmonds, with Raheem Mostert, and with Myles Gaskin. But it does look like we know one thing for sure. Chase Edmonds will be the third down back of this backfield, and I think Raheem Mostert and Sony Michel will probably rotate in on early downs, but Chase Edmonds looks to be the guy that we want to own here. How high does that mean we should draft him? I'm not exactly sure, but when you get to like the 9th, 10th round area of fantasy drafts, I'm okay with Chase Edmonds at that point. But if anybody is drafting Chase Edmonds with the hopes that he's going to become some workhorse running back, I think you'll be disappointed. If you can get RB2 production, mid RB2, low end RB2 production out of Chase Edmonds, I would probably consider that a win this year. So not super excited about him from like a ceiling perspective, but I do think he can be pretty solid if he starts to slide in more sharper draft rooms that are not really concerned with, locking down their RB2 slot. If he starts to slide into the 9th, 10th round, I think he's worth a pick at that point in time. Vikings versus Niners, literally nothing happened in this game outside of Trey Sermon looking like ass and Tyus Chandler showing something for the Vikings. That's pretty much all that happened in this game. We can move on to the Steelers versus Jaguars, which had a lot of fantasy implications. I would say of the games that happened this weekend, we had the most fantasy implications out of the Steelers versus Jaguars. Let's start with the Jaguars side of things. Number 1, everybody played in this game outside of James Robinson. So outside of James Robinson, all the starters were on the field, wide receivers, tight ends, running backs, quarterback, everything for like a good half of the game. And it looks like Christian Kirk, Marvin Jones, and Zay Jones will be the starting 3 wide receiver set for this team, with Christian Kirk and probably some kind of rotation of Marvin and Zay on the outside in 2 wide receiver sets. So it is clear, we probably knew this already given the length or the size of the contract that Christian Kirk signed, but he is the number 1 in this offense. From a target perspective, he led the team in targets. He was commanding targets left, right, and center in this game, and he also led the team in usage as well. So he could be a guy that moves up quite a bit in my rankings as well, and a solid grab for you guys looking for, around 8 wide receiver, around 7 wide receiver that could give you good PPR production, especially if you guys play in deep leagues like I do, where you have to start 3 wide receivers and you have 2 flex spots in like a full PPR format. I think Christian Kirk is going to be a great value in those type of formats because I think he's going to get a lot of targets this year. He might be one of the sneakiest, like 140 target receivers that we've seen in a couple years. It wouldn't shock me if he was like this year's Darnell Mooney, for example, from like a production standpoint. The snap counts in this backfield look a little unfortunate for ETN. At first glance, you guys can see them on the screen there, but he did take all 6 of the first snaps on the first drive. He took 5 of 6 on the second drive, and then the first 4 on the third drive, and then he got a little banged up and they took him off the field. So again, ETN is clearly the starter here. We don't know what it's going to be like once James Robinson comes back, but I wouldn't be too worried about Snoop Conner getting a good amount of snaps and all that kind of stuff because it was more a result of how the game played out, not necessarily what they planned. And I got to be honest, looking at this offense, looking at what they're doing, looking at how Trevor Lawrence is playing, more importantly, I'm getting a little bit higher on this Jaguars offense. I wasn't excited about them. I wasn't really that excited about Christian Kirk. I wasn't really that excited about Trevor Lawrence as a late round dart throw, but I'm getting a little bit more excited about this offense. So Trevor Lawrence, good late round quarterback. Christian Kirk, a good mid round wide receiver to go after. I think Zay Jones and Marvin Jones are good late round dart throws as well. And then of course, Travis Etienne, the highest drafted guy from here, is another guy that I'm very high on in the 3rd, 4th round where he goes. So Moving on to the Steelers side of things, the biggest takeaway here is definitely the usage, as it always is in these preseason games. We have Deontay Johnson, who is operating as the number one wide receiver, who has got to be one of my biggest values in all of fantasy drafts right now. He is becoming one of my guys this year. I didn't intend for this to happen, but I think it's ridiculous that we're letting a top 5 target share wide receiver fall to the 4th round, and everybody's just concerned about quarterback play. And honestly, the quarterbacks don't look that bad as it currently stands. And on the other side of things, or on the rest of the wide receiver core, we see George Pickens already surpassing Chase Claypool on the depth chart. He looks like the clear number 2 receiver in this offense as the primary outside guy in 2 wide receiver sets. But Chase Claypool played a big slot role, which is kind of interesting for him because we know he's a huge guy, like 6'3", 230 pounds. Big slot guy at that size with his athleticism. We saw him catch a seam route up the middle. He looked pretty good there, but he played 14 of his 16 snaps on in the slot in this game, and that's going to be interesting for his fantasy value. Again, this offense looks pretty fun with these 3 wide receivers, with Pat Freiermuth, with Najee Harris. I think we're underestimating what either Kenny Pickett or Mitch Trubisky can do as a fantasy quarterback, as like a late round guy. If you guys play in super flex leagues, I think both of those guys are pretty undervalued as well. Another guy that I love this year is Pat Freiermuth, who I just alluded to. He ran 15 of 18 total routes for the Steelers, which again, similar to what I said about Mike Gesicki, we want our tight ends running routes. We don't want them in line blocking, not out on routes. And Pat Freiermuth was running routes. He is currently my highest owned tight end on Underdog Fantasy. I am so high on Pat Freiermuth as like a late round guy that could be, a top 5 tight end this year. So you absolutely love to see that. I really think that these questionable quarterbacks that we have in Pittsburgh with Mitch Trubisky and with Kenny Pickett are going to be drawn to the safety blanket tight end that is Pat Freiermuth. So I think he's going to be heavily targeted this year. I think he's going to have over 100 targets. I think he's going to be second on this team in targets. So I really, really love Pat Freiermuth, what I've seen out of him. And then while Mitch Trubisky started the game, going back to the quarterback position, I really made sure to go back and watch this one because there was a ton of fantasy implications. And it's now 2 straight weeks in which Kenny Pickett has closed the gap for the quarterback 1 in this team. He looked really good in this game. He looked really good last week as well. I still expect Trubisky to be the week 1 starter, but that gap is closing. And I'm getting a little nervous as a guy that faded the shit out of Kenny Pickett in rookie drafts this year, but such is life. Sometimes you get things wrong. I'm not saying he's going to be an elite quarterback or anything yet, but he does look pretty good. And I do think he's going to be on the field sooner rather than later. I don't think we're going to get 17 games of Mitch Trubisky this year. I think it's going to be lucky for Mitch if he gets 3-4 games as the starter and before Kenny Pickett starts to take the field. So let's move on to the Cowboys versus Chargers. Not much to take away from this game outside of a promising outing from Josh Palmer, who looked pretty good in this game. A number 3 wide receiver for the Los Angeles Chargers. Justin Herbert led offense. This team is going to score points, and we don't really have a tight end of note on this offense with Gerald Everett there. He's fine, but whatever. So Josh Palmer could definitely have some big weeks this year, similar to what we saw maybe out of Van Jefferson last year for the Rams. I think he's great in best ball because you don't have to choose when to start him. And in deep leagues, I think he's also a great late round flyer as well. But that was pretty much the only thing that happened out of the Cowboys-Chargers game. They're like kick return or return 2 kicks, but that was pretty much all else that happened. And then finally, let's get to Sunday's games. There is a game tonight between the Atlanta Falcons and the New York Jets on Monday as I'm recording this, but I wanted to get this out today for you guys. So if anything wild happens tonight with like Elijah Moore, Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall, whatever, I'll be sure to cover it on TikTok. But for the most part, I'm just going to cover these Sunday games and then we'll get out of here. But if you're not following the TikTok, make sure you are doing so. Link is down below in the description. So Eagles versus Browns, the first Sunday game that we had yesterday. Couple sleeper takeaways from this game. Nothing major because not a lot of starters played. But the biggest takeaway for me was that David Bell made his debut, a guy that I was really high on as a prospect. I had him as a back-end first round type of caliber prospect in dynasty rookie drafts. He had 2 nice catches on 4 targets for 37 yards in this game. Already playing good routes as well with Donovan Peoples-Jones and Cooper did not play in this game. But for the most part, David Bell already back on the field running as like the 3rd or 4th option in his first preseason game. So I think he's going to be a guy, especially once Watson comes back in week 12, week 13, once he's off of his suspension. I think David Bell could be this year's Amon-Ra St. Brown because he was a great prospect, undervalued because he tested poorly, which is what happened to Amon-Ra St. Brown as well. But he was a great prospect in college. He was the Big Ten receiver of the year over Garrett Wilson, over Chris Olave, over Jackson Smith and Jigba in that conference. So I really, really love what I saw to David Bell in his first game. He will definitely make an appearance in my sleepers video on my 24th birthday in early September. Jerome Ford and Dearness Johnson continue to look really good and continue to make Cleveland easily the deepest backfield in the league. And it looks like Kareem Hunt could still be traded. I don't know if it's necessarily likely of happening, but on the other side of this game, we have Miles Sanders dealing with seemingly something every week, but he has no timetable for his return. And Kareem Hunt to the Eagles would make a ton of sense. So we have to monitor that situation. The Cleveland Browns have an embarrassment of riches at the running back position with the way that Dearness Johnson and Jerome Ford have played. And speaking of the Eagles' backfield, that was the only real takeaway on their side of the ball. With Boston Scott back, we saw Kenneth Gainwell and him split carries almost down the middle as well as routes. So Gainwell's still a great sleeper pick, but don't forget about Boston Scott as like an 18th round dart throw in best ball drafts and a guy that just could be a nuisance to whoever is going to be the starting running back for this team. It wouldn't shock me at all if Boston Scott has the biggest role of this backfield over the course of the season, with Sanders inconsistent, with Gainwell being kind of more of a pass catching specialist. Boston Scott has looked pretty good in the limited snaps that we've seen out of him so far. Bengals versus Giants, another game that didn't have a ton of takeaways, but the Giants rookies were really the only thing that we were looking for here. Wan'Dale Robinson has locked up the starting slot receiver role, hook, line, and sinker. We expect Kenny Golladay and Kadarius Toney to be the starting outside wide receivers once they go to 3 wide receiver sets, which will be a lot in this offense. Then we'll have Wan'Dale Robinson come in, and Colin Johnson, hook 'em horns, looking pretty good as well. He might push Kenny Golladay a little bit, but I don't expect him to be like a starting receiver for this team by any means. And then Giants rookie tight end Daniel Bellinger is the other rookie that we're paying attention to here. It looks like a great sleeper because he's been running most of the routes with the ones, ran 14 out of 17 in this game, ran a lot in the first preseason game as well. So he's another guy to keep an eye on as a late round dart throw, 4th round, dynasty rookie draft pick. Could definitely do a lot worse. And then the final game before we get out of here is Cardinals versus Ravens. The only real takeaway that we have from this game is the shocking split that we saw between the Cardinals backfield, because last week we saw James Conner and Darrell Williams get the night off, which to me signaled that, okay, James Conner is the early down guy. Darrell Williams is going to slide into the Chase Edmonds role and be the handcuff if anything were to happen to James Conner. We saw Darrell Williams do a really good job in Kansas City last year when Clyde Edwards-Helaire went down. But this week, Darrell Williams saw 4 snaps early on, which could just mean they were just looking to see something out of him and then took him off the field. But then we saw Eno Benjamin get a lot of snaps, and we also saw some other guys get mixed in there as well. So my opinion still is that Darrell Williams is the one that you want out of this backfield behind James Conner as the pass catching specialist for and the primary handcuff for James Conner. So it did give me a little bit of a doubt from what we saw with Jonathan Ward and Eno Benjamin mixing in more than Darrell Williams, but he did get his snaps early on. Then they pulled him off the field. I think they saw what they needed to see. But that is it, basically. Those are the major takeaways from preseason week 2. As I mentioned, Falcons, Jets tonight could be some takeaways in that game, but for the most part, we are done on preseason week 2. We are getting into prime fantasy draft season. We just had our listener league draft this past weekend. I'm sure many of you guys are going to be drafting this weekend coming up and also Labor Day weekend as well. It looks like if you guys don't know when you're drafting it, you're deciding on when to draft, I would say you should punt it to Labor Day weekend because the Colts, a couple other teams have already talked about playing their starters for like a full half of preseason week 3. So I think the way NFL teams are operating this year is they're treating preseason week 3 the way they've always treated preseason week 3. And preseason week 2 and 1 are their evaluations for like their special teams and their 90-man rosters and all that kind of stuff. But their starters are being evaluated in preseason week 3, which is what I've seen from most of these teams. But I could be wrong. Either way, better safe than sorry. You don't want to be doing your drafts and then have your first round pick go down with a torn ACL or something like that because of preseason week 3. So if you have the choice, I would punt it to Labor Day weekend. And again, the contest that is running that I plugged at the beginning of the video, promo code FSE at sign up and first deposit on underdogfantasy.com will get you 100% back on whatever you put in. It'll also get you our redraft rankings and our dynasty rankings for free. So if you're wondering how you can get our rankings and you haven't already signed up on Underdog, that is how you can do it. And if you do it this week from August 20th to August 27th, you'll be put in a raffle to win $50 site credit on Underdog Fantasy. So if you put in $10, you'll have $20 on the site to play with. You'll get our redraft rankings for free, our dynasty rankings for free, and then you might also win $50 on top of that. So just for like a $10 entry on Underdog Fantasy, you could win all that good stuff. So make sure to check that out. Link will be in the pinned comment down below. Will also be in the description down below. And if you can't play Underdog Fantasy and you still want our rankings, check out our Patreon down below as well. So with that being said, guys, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.